got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me.
Man, what a great movie. Pixar sure don't make them like that anymore. Whether we like it or not, there is no animation studio more well known and loved than Pixar. Even with its recent streak of mediocre releases, there is no doubt the studio has captured hearts, minds, and wallets around the world. A new Pixar film used to be a big deal, and while that is no longer true culturally with how Disney treats its media, there is no denying Pixar still has some major brand recognition due to its ironclad legacy. I was lucky enough to grow up during the golden age of Pixar, which happened to coincide with my development as a gamer. As a result, I played a lot of Pixar games over the years. Originally, I was going to play all the Pixar titles, but the project became too large of an undertaking for just one video. Instead, I decided to focus on the ones I enjoyed the most, with the possibility of more installments in the future. So without further ado, here are the best Pixar games according to me, because I'm an authority on this kind of stuff. Toy Story 2 was my first Pixar film, and if I recall correctly, I've somehow managed to watch it before seeing the original. I don't know what led me to that, but being a brand new gamer, I was instantly infatuated with the opening scene, wishing it was a real game that I could play. Unbeknownst to me, that Christmas I would be blessed with Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the rescue. While I loved the game, I didn't actually get to experience a whole lot of it. I was but a baby gamer, and my English vocabulary consisted of mom, dad, and new game. A number of years later, I actually replayed Toy Story and got all the way to the Zurg battle, upon which I got stuck again. More on that later. Oh man, that lost instrumental is forever etched into my soul. Speaking of etching, I love the Etch and Sketch themed level select. It's one of those little things that don't make a game worse if they're missing, but going the extra mile can really add to the experience. Toy Story 2 loosely follows the events of the movie, taking quite a few creative liberties for the sake of gameplay. The game works on a token system similar to Mario 64. Each level has a series of challenges that award you these Pizza Planet tokens to unlock the other levels. We start out in Andy's house, which serves as an extended tutorial introducing the different challenges, the format of which remains largely unchanged throughout the rest of the game. Before that, we are introduced to the controls. Buzz has a laser and a spin attack at his disposal, both of which can be charged for extra damage. As for traversal, you can of course double jump as well as grab onto ledges. The platforming is not particularly demanding. In fact, the entire game is a little slow and floaty, but it's something I got used to fairly quick. Hey, just a quick correction here. The game is actually running slower. I'm stupid and I didn't apply the fix for the game because it's always been like that on our PC even back then, and I didn't realize it was slow until I tried the PS1 version. So yeah, apologies for the footage. Well, anyway, each level has a number of collectibles tied to different challenges. This ranges from regular coins to little guys, all the way to freestanding tokens, which are often awarded by a level-specific puzzle. These are some of the best moments in the game, introducing some welcome variety to an established system. The other two challenges are some kind of a timed event and a mini-boss. In certain levels, there is an additional collectible in the form of Mr. Potato Head's appendages. If you manage to retrieve one, you unlock a power-up, which is also made available in other levels where it was previously locked. They always looked so cool, so tantalizing in their little box. I craved that rocket boot, knowing I could never have it. Moving on to level 2, things ramp up as more enemies and harder challenges are introduced. One of my favorite aspects of Toy Story 2 is the art design. Despite having little to work with graphically, the game manages to pull off the style and scale that is necessary for a convincing Toy Story experience. Something I particularly enjoy is the verticality in a lot of the levels, as well as the enemy designs. There's a good variety of them and each provides a slightly different challenge, although they do get a bit stale towards the end. The same can be said for a few of the bosses. The mini-bosses are brief enough to not overstay their welcome, even when the fight isn't particularly amazing. Each couple of levels you get a special boss stage, an arena with a unique boss who usually has more than one attack. I found these to be often easier and have less stakes than the mini-bosses, some of which you fight on top of structures that you can easily fall from. Since there is no fall damage, your punishment is the time you need to spend getting back up there. The third level is a construction site, and I always love the color mixing minigame here. It doesn't make much sense, but it's just pure fun for the sake of gameplay. The whole game follows this philosophy and it works great for it. Story-wise, there is no reason for Mr. Potato Head to keep his sizable arsenal from Buzz if they both want to save Woody, but for a player it is engaging. Please, my starchy friend, I need the shoes. Sorry Buzz, but I lost my left arm. Until you can retrieve it, it's no shoes for you. And I do realize I'm just fundamentally describing what a game is, but tie-ins especially face a challenging process in which they need to determine how to mold the context given by the film into a fun gameplay experience. In simpler terms, what do you take out and what do you keep or add that serves the medium of games? Back with Buzz, we fight a radioactive slime monster in an alley, visit Al's toy barn and the neighboring arcade, and ascend the apartment building in which Al's penthouse is located. The moving elevators in particular are a fun change of pace and one of my favorite levels. Also, there seem to be not one, but two neglectful fathers present in this game. The mouse is too busy throwing a token down the shaft to help his wife look for their children, and the rooster has straight up imprisoned one of the chicks. What the hell do you mean I can keep it? Lurking beyond Al's penthouse is the hardest level in the game. Not by design, mind you, rather a programming oversight. If you run the game at 60 FPS, Emperor Zurg will evade Buzz, and you will not be able to catch up to him no matter how hard you try. As I've mentioned in the beginning, I did not use the fix that would remedy this, so I had to repeatedly, carefully bait Zurg into a corner and then hit him with a charge-up spin attack, and then immediately jump back onto the elevator to avoid plummeting to my death. Luckily, if you die during a boss fight, their health bar stays the same, so while in my last life I was finally able to finesse a victory. After that it was smooth sailing, though I have to admit I kinda skipped over the runway level, only getting a couple of the tokens. I just found it to be a little dragged out and the formula was getting a bit stale at that point, which was partially on me for muscling through the game too quickly. The last boss is of course the Prospector, aka Stinky Pete, along with two other bosses recycled from previous levels. Pete himself is actually a mini-boss in the airport level, so he too is technically recycled. Let's just say this is not the most inspired boss battle. Fun fact, this is the only time we see Woody in the game. Looking a little off there, Woody. Jane's not faring much better over here. She's fucking terrifying. But hey, at least Buzz is perfect. He's beautiful, no qualms there. The music's wonderful in this game, by the way. Forgot to mention that. Alright, moving on. In 2008, there was a particular DVD that my little brother would have playing nearly every day in our household, often several times in a row. As a result, I have likely seen WallE at least 20 times in its entirety. Having since grown up a bit, I really enjoy and appreciate the first act of the film. It's not often you get a post-apocalyptic movie from Disney, though Pixar has always pushed to include more serious themes and moments in their films. That being said, WallE is still mostly meant to be cute, and on the Axiom, the plot becomes a lot more conventional. Even so, the atmosphere and cinematography of WallE are something I truly enjoy and appreciate now more than ever. In 2008, that was not the case. Seeing the film every other day, I was fed up with WallE, so when my brother got the game for the PS2, I sneered and paid it no mind. But over time I caved and gave it a try, and I found it to be pretty enjoyable. I never completed it myself, and we eventually sold it, but I remember it being at the very least quite decent. First things first, there are several versions of this game, each differing quite drastically. The version for 7th gen consoles features more intricate environments, exploration, and WallE can roll around like this, but it is shorter and touches on less story beats. The version I played is the PC/PS2 version, though it also came out on the PSP. The game starts with a lore-friendly tutorial framed as a routine checkup, in which the WallE bots verify their functionality. Right off the bat, WallE feels great to control, though keep in mind I am using a controller. Most levels revolve around collecting by and large energy charges, of which there are a few different types. The blue let you access doors, yellow ones replenish your health, and the red charge allows you to use your laser. The biggest chunk of gameplay is made up of platforming. WallE can gain momentum if he goes down a steep enough ramp, which allows him to clear gaps. He can also slide under obstacles by folding into box form, and along with the aforementioned laser, this can also be used to destroy boxes. If you get damaged, you can use your solar panels in specific spots to regain health, which is a nice diegetic way to integrate a healing system. Last but not least, WallE can of course create gate and throw trash cubes. This serves to both activate and access various things as well as damage enemies later on. After the tutorial, we are introduced to what I'm gonna call a racer chase level. There are mainly 3 types of levels in WallE, the regular kind, which make up most of the game and are generally the most enjoyable, the racer chase, which are fast-paced and linear, and on-rails turret sections, the least enjoyable and luckily the least utilized of the 3. The occasional change of pace helps WallE to avoid becoming too monotonous, and it works really well in keeping the momentum of the story. WallE does lie further on the spectrum than Toy Story 2 in following the story beat for beat, but still takes its time to present interesting and varied gameplay that fits within the context. One of my favorite levels is later on the Axiom, when you enlist the help of the reject bots by using your music. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's yet another good example of adapting story elements to your advantage. One aspect of gameplay I've yet to mention are the door puzzles, which are all extremely simplistic. I went to check the game's rating and here it is PEGI 3, which I'd actually say is a bit too generous. Some of the gameplay might be a little hard for somebody that young. Another fun mechanic that calls back to the film is the ability to unearth artifacts, which WallE collects in his little backpack. Each of these has a little animated cutscene to go along with it, and you can tell the developers had fun making them. Again, a small detail, but charming nonetheless. I really enjoyed WallE. It was quick, to the point, and didn't overstay its welcome. There were a few negatives, mainly the rather basic enemies, who admittedly were the only enemy type in the film, but I believe more could have been done to make encounters more varied. The other negative is that the finale is a little underwhelming, but given the scope of the game and the context of the actual movie, it's realistically just about what you can get. Overall, WallE was a surprisingly pleasant game that, while not overtly ambitious and ever so slightly basic, still delivers on almost all fronts. Good work. I'll be honest, I don't have a personal anecdote about The Incredibles. There is a possibility I saw it in theaters, though my memory is fuzzy. What I do know is I had this McDonald's toy of Mr. Incredible. Sure, it's pretty awesome. Wait, actually that's not true. I do have a bit of history with this game. For the longest time, I couldn't get my hands on it. There are a total of 3 Incredibles games. The main one that we're taking a look at today is just called The Incredibles. Then there is The Incredibles When Danger Calls, which is a pretty basic selection of minigames that we mistakenly bought first, thinking it was the former. Lastly, we have The Incredibles Rise of the Underminer, a beat-em-up which takes place right after the movie. We got that one too after I played it at a friend's house, and I remember having fun playing that in co-op, but that's a topic for another video. In the end, I only ever experienced the official Incredibles game by borrowing it from a friend, and I didn't manage to complete it before having to return it. As a result, I remember the least of this game, so this will be an almost first impression. After launching the game, you're greeted by none other than Samuel L. Jackson narrating the menus.
Now don't go messing with all those settings and stuff. Does Samuel L. Jackson like anime?
Yes, I do. Hentai too.
That's what I'm talking about!
Most of the voice cast returns for the game, save for Bob and Helen, whose new actors do a decent job. The campaign follows the story pretty closely, while again taking liberties necessary for engaging gameplay. The start is especially strong. Taking place in the golden days of superheroes, we play as Mr. Incredible and later Elastigirl hunting down Bon Voyage in a series of set pieces. The game looks pretty good for its time and scope, though some of the models are a little off. On first impression, the gameplay of The Incredibles is quite solid. It feels great to hit bad guys, especially if there's a group of them lined up for you. The game has a scoring system that awards you more of this meter, which allows you to perform heavy attacks and specials that deal a lot more damage and cover more ground. Both Bob and Helen can pick up enemies and bombs, but only Bob can pick up larger objects and ground pound, while Helen can grab and punch enemies from a distance and perform a wider reaching special. She can also remotely grab onto swinging objects, which Bob cannot. Speaking of which, this is where the first issue rears its head. Throughout the game, there are many sections like these, and the swinging mechanics are kinda hard to gauge. The moment a character grabs onto an object, they sort of snap into a rigid position, and the momentum feels off even when you do things correctly. The old time section ends with a boss fight against a helicopter, which boils down to waiting until he shoots bombs and throwing said bombs back at him. Rather simple, but it's the first boss, so not the worst introduction. The next level has Mr. Incredible and Frozone save civilians from a burning building.
I gotta get in shape.
The enemies present are unique to this stage, and thank God they are. A group of these can stun lock you into hell, especially in tight spaces. In general, groups of enemies can stunlock you for a long time, and it can feel unjust, especially if it's because an attack doesn't register or gets interrupted. The same can be said for hazards in the environment, since whenever something damages you, depending on the setup, it can be near impossible to recover. Moving on, we get introduced to Dash's levels, the first of which consists of beating the bus to school. A word of warning, should you want to play this game, please make sure to limit the frame rate to 60. The game has it uncapped by default, which can lead to some, issues. That aside, these running sections are fine. They introduce some variety, but could use a bit more telegraphing when it comes to some hazards. Next up is Mr. Incredible in the jungle. A few new enemies get their debut, and we get this small turret section, which is a little hard to control. What comes next, however, is far harder. I'd go as far as to say the Omnidroid fight is the main contributing factor for this game's T rating. There is a legitimate boss battle in this licensed kids game. Granted, it's nothing crazy, but with how comparatively easy the previous and following stages were, the Omnidroid's almost a casual filter. When the battle is over, we get a time skip, as Bob unwittingly works for Syndrome, and in the following stage we return to the island. Towards the end of the level, we fight this tank mini-boss, which the game really likes. Following the events of the film, we fight the new and improved Omnidroid.
Well, okay, technically he doesn't fight him in the movie, but you know, it's a game, it's for gameplay, we fucking talked about this already.
Who isn't so new and improved in terms of gameplay, though he is a little bit faster and more aggressive, using all of his moves from the get-go. Additionally, he launches spinning blades your way at the end of each health bar. I also finally learned how to dodge roll here. It would have certainly been helpful in the first fight. As Mr. Incredible escapes the facility, he fights yet another tank boss. Very exciting. And as dull as that may be, there is a more important problem that I was starting to notice. The Incredibles has some inconsistent checkpoints. There are short, easy sections that are generous with checkpoints, and long, tedious, switch-pulling ones that are really stingy in this regard. Add enemies into the mix and the result is rage. I had to take several breaks playing this because there was steam coming out of my ears. Moving on to some more positives, I have to mention the sound design as well as music, both of which are done very well, especially for movie game standards. I don't know how much was lifted from the film, but the soundscape feels really authentic. The same goes for the environments, which are well crafted and stay true to the film. Overall, the game is really solid in its realization, and I want to make that clear because despite being frustrated with certain aspects, I feel like there was genuine effort put into its development. After the rest of the family arrives on the island, we switch to Elastigirl once again, playing through a series of enemy encounters and laser puzzles. These become more and more prevalent towards the end, and I'm not a fan. Next in line is the second and last of Dash's levels, mirroring the scene from the film. Not much more to add, it's a cool set piece, but still a bit hard to react to certain obstacles. Interestingly enough, the following stage sees us play as Violet in a brief stealth section. This is the only level of its kind in the whole game, and I can see why. The mechanics are really simple and they don't give you much to work with. Violet is no solid snake, and the detection is both harsh and forgiving depending on where you stand. The stage immediately after is one of my favorites. Dash and Violet team up to form Super Monkey Ball and roll around wrecking the island. Unlike the Dash levels, this one is open and sort of loops around a bit. It flows nicely and helps to reintroduce some scale into the game before we return to Bob and Helen, who each get one more level before the final boss. A few more switch and swing puzzles make their last appearance, thank God, and we get to fight someone special. You guessed it, the tank mini-boss. In Mr. Incredible stage, you get to battle his handsome lad not once, not twice, but 3 times. Very cool. Finally, we have arrived at the final boss, which is incredibly easy compared to his earlier appearances, but at least it's a nice set piece which actually ends the way it does in the story. The Incredibles is a conflicting experience. While the game has a fairly high production value across the board and can be very enjoyable at times, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't frustrated with a lot of its shortcomings. Still, the variation in gameplay, the Omnidroid battle, and all the spots where the game truly shines elevated above the rest in terms of ambition, and I really enjoyed that. There's a lot to like here, and for what it is, The Incredibles does its source material a good to adequate amount of justice. Well, there you have it. Those are my 3 Pixar games of choice. There's still a lot more to cover in this category, both good and bad, so I'm not closing the book on Pixar just yet. I haven't ranked the ones we covered today as they're all pretty different, and each has some unique qualities and blemishes. But if I had to, it would probably look similar to the order of appearance. You know what, I think I'd actually put Cars first. That's a real man's game. Speaking of which, if you haven't seen my video on it, you can give it a watch right here. And if you really like my work, why not support it on Patreon, like all these wonderful folks already do. Blessings be upon you. Either way, thanks for watching, and see you at the next one.
To infinity and beyond!